Father. We pray all of these things in Christ's precious and perfect and holy name. Amen. Well, good morning. I am thrilled that we get to be together as a family to hear from God through His Word. And this is the second of 2 weeks where we are talking kind of about where we are as a church and where we believe God is leading us in the year to come. We've been studying the Sermon on the Mount, kind of put that one on pause. We will resume that series starting next week, but for right now, this is just a good season. It's the start of the school year, and it's kind of a moment in time where many of us are kind of thinking about at least what life will look like over the rest of the academic year, and it's a good opportunity for us as a church to just kind of pause, talk about where we are, and talk about where we believe God is leading us in the year to come, and to try to anchor that in Scripture. So it's not just kind of random ideas from the leaders of this church. We have been looking at 2 Kings chapter 19, right? It is about 705 BC, and the Assyrian army is surrounding Jerusalem. They are trying to take the city of Jerusalem, but Isaiah, kind of that famous Old Testament prophet, Isaiah has assured the king, Hezekiah, that the Assyrians are going to fail. It's not going to work. They're not going to take the city, and they're actually going to make it through it. But he does warn him, hey, look, those first 2 years, they're going to be rough, right? It's going to be a little hand to mouth. It's not going to be sort of this organized resistance. It's going to get a little dicey before God ultimately delivers His people. But in the third year, you're going to go back to kind of life as it was. You're going to go back to doing some things that require strategic planning and foresight and all that kind of stuff. And said, hey, I don't think that is a prophetic foreshadowing of COVID, but it just feels a lot like the last 2 years for us, where things were a little rough, things were a little rocky, things were a little hand to mouth, but now we are, both as a church and seemingly as a city, at a pivot point where we don't necessarily get to go back to life as it was, but we get to talk about doing some things as a local church that are going to require a little bit more sustained focus, sustained leadership development, sustained volunteer recruitment, stuff like that. But the point of the sermon is not just to say, oh, look, we're sort of turning the page on a pandemic. The point of the series is to say that we are trying for the year to come to anchor ourselves in a little phrase that we find in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 30, talking about those who would make it through sort of the Assyrian assault. It says, the surviving remnant of the house of Judah will again take root downward and bear fruit upward. And last week we talked about what it would look like for us to take root. What would it look like for us individually and collectively to take root in God, to take root in the church, to take root in community, to really dig down and do the kind of heart work that God calls us to do in order to prepare the way for us to do what we're going to talk about this week, which is bear fruit. Now, I understand if you've been around the church for a while, this language of bearing fruit is really familiar to us, even though we don't necessarily know exactly what Scripture means when it says it. And I understand that if you are brand new to church, this language of bearing fruit is kind of like, wait, what in the world do you mean? It sounds spiritual, it sounds Jesus-y, but I have no idea what you mean. And there's probably a lot of different ways to describe the reality of bearing fruit, but probably one of the most succinct working definitions comes from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. He says, he tells us to let our light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven, right? So when we talk about bearing fruit, it is this idea of doing things like sharing our faith, serving the poor and marginalized, discipling a new Christian, going on a mission trip, all of these things that we do individually, all of these things we do as a community, but we do them with the ultimate goal of glorifying God. We do them with the ultimate goal of displaying to the world the beauty of the God that we worship. So it's not this self-serving project of, hey, let's go do a bunch of good things so people speak highly of us as a church. Let's go do a bunch of things so people speak highly of you as an employee at your organization. No, let's go live our lives so that somebody who's watching would walk away not impressed with us, but would walk away impressed with the God that we worship, would walk away curious about the God that we worship. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. What does it look like for us to actually bear fruit? And we want to talk about that really, really specifically. But before we do that, I want to make one overall point. Because if you've ever tried to bear fruit, like if you've ever gotten serious about this in your life, you realize that it is not the easiest thing to do. Right? That we're kind of making a mistake if we just say like, oh yeah, awesome. Now that I have the vision, I will just go out there and in my own strength and in my own power, I am going to go bear a bunch of spiritual fruit. Like it just doesn't work that way, right? Like you think of our community groups as an example, right? If the goal that our community group leaders have is they're like, look, I just want to host some people in my house, bake some brownies, make a pot of coffee, and have a little bit of a conversation, that is, it's a commitment, but it's not all that hard to pull that off. But if our community group leaders are like, yeah, what coffee, brownies, like all that kind of stuff, but like what I'm really trying to do is lead a discussion that will help people grow more into the image and the likeness of Jesus. All of a sudden, if that's the ambition, which that would be the description of what it means to bear fruit, all of a sudden we look at it and say like, wait, there is no way that I can do that in my own strength. There's no way that I could do that in my own power, right? Which is why we spent last week talking about, hey, before we ever bear fruit, we've got to take root in God because we're going to have to do this reliant on the power of God. We're going to have to do this trusting in God. Right? And that makes sense. That's not a new idea for many of us, that we operate by the grace of God. Yet, knowing that, I will tell you this as a pastor. When it comes to this idea of bearing fruit, I sometimes feel like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway. Right? I'm not even going to ask how many of you have seen it, right? Because I knew going into the Sunday I wanted to use that illustration. I was like, hey, that movie's been out for a while. Like, I should check and see, like, how many people in our church probably weren't even born when Castaway was out there. And just to make some of us feel old, Castaway came out in 2000. 22 years ago, Tom Hanks made that movie, which I know means some of you are like, I have never seen it. All I know about Tom Hanks is he led the way with COVID. He got it first, and then the whole world fell apart. And other than that, I don't even know what this Castaway thing is. That's okay. To the best of my knowledge, I've never seen the movie either. Don't worry, that's not going to stop me. Because 22 years ago, we had these things called commercials, which means even though I've never seen the movie, I saw the trailer a lot. Because when Tom Hanks made a movie, it was a big deal. So in my mind, I have this scene of a poorly shaven, very thin Tom Hanks on a desert island frantically building a fire because he's trying to get the attention of like a passing airplane or a ship or something like that because he wants to get rescued off the island. I don't even know whether it worked or not. But I do know that sometimes I feel like that in my relationship with God, particularly when it comes to this issue of bearing fruit. Right? Where you're like, hey, God, billions of people in the world, the church exists on every continent. There's so many things going on in the world. And sometimes I feel like a little spiritual Tom Hanks being like, hey, God, don't forget about Restoration City, South Arlington. Yeah, there's a part of Arlington that's south of 395. Like, I know, check your map. It's there. Amazon found it. You'll know where it is, God. We're here. We meet in a school. Don't let that confuse you. I know you're probably thinking stained glass and church building, but hello, Gunston Auditorium number 1. That's where we are. God, could you please remember us? Or God, could you please remember me? Let's go ahead and make it more personal. Right? Have you ever had that moment where you feel like you're offering your life to God? You know that Romans 12 tells you to offer your body as a living sacrifice to God, and sometimes you wonder that despite your intention to offer yourself to God, you wonder if God's in heaven being like, yeah, nice thought, just not that interested. Because I think I could do so much more through that person. I could do so much more through that church. I could do so much more through him. I could do so much more through her. Like sometimes I think in our hearts, our heads are straight on this, but in our hearts, we wonder if God really wants to work through us. And I need to make sure as we go into this sermon, you know that we're not playing castaway with God. In fact, the scripture paints a very different picture, almost the complete opposite. 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9, for the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth. We're not trying to get God's attention. He is searching because he wants to show himself strong for those who are wholly devoted to him. Yes, we need to take root in God. Yes, we need to be on this journey of wholehearted devotion to God. But we don't need to ever worry about getting the attention of God and trying to talk him into bearing fruit through our lives. He's like, no, I'm already looking for the people who want to be wholeheartedly devoted. I'm already looking because I want to show myself strong. Jesus says it this way in John chapter 15. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want and it will be done for you. He's thinking whatever you want in line with the will of my Father. My Father, check this out, is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and prove, not just to ourselves, but prove to a watching world that we really are disciples of the living God. Right? So I would love to fight back against anything in our hearts that's like, yeah, I get it. But let me just tell you, like, what a mess I can be. Let me just tell you everything that's going on in my life. Let me just tell you all the reasons why I don't think God wants to bear fruit through me. And hey, I want to call us to that work of formation and not getting complacent with our lives. Right? What does it look like to pursue that wholehearted devotion to God? Like, what does it look like to get serious about growing into the image and the likeness of Jesus? Absolutely. But just know as we head into that conversation that God would love to show himself strong on your behalf. That God would love to bear fruit through this church to show to us and to a watching world that he is still alive and he's still moving and he's still changing lives in 21st century America. Right? And our job today is to just dream of what could that look like? What is some of the fruit that we're trusting God for in the coming year as we walk into this year confident that he's with us, that he's for us. And if he's for us, what could be against us? And I believe, and the elders believe, and our staff team believes, that a lot of the fruit that God is calling us to in the coming year is going to come in the form of reaching and serving and loving the next generation. And I want to show you why that matters so much to all of us. If you have kids, you don't have kids, you have kids and you're not even sure you want kids, you do have kids, don't have kids, and you really wish you did, doesn't matter. This isn't a question of like, okay, I'm just talking to the families. I'm talking to all of us because there's a tremendous amount at stake here. Let's go back to Hezekiah. 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 21. We're kind of fast forwarding to the end of the story. And literally the end of Hezekiah's story. Hezekiah rested with his ancestors, and his son Manasseh became king in his place. Remember last week I told you that Hezekiah was a king devoted to God. He was the example of what it looked like to be rooted in God, what it looked like to be rooted in the temple, what it looked like to be rooted in community. He was the model. He's a reformer. He's a hero. He's one of the great kings of the Old Testament. Go with me into chapter 21, very next verse. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king. Most people have concluded 12-year-olds can't handle an iPhone, so handling a monarchy probably not going to go well. He reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. Usually, a long reign is the sign of a righteous king in the Old Testament, but we're going to find out that's not really the case. His mother's name was Hephzibah. Hezekiah got a lot right, but he also got some things wrong, including multiple wives. So now we know which wife, produced Manasseh. And this guy, though, this little boy king, did what was evil in the Lord's sight. imitating the detestable practices of the nations that the Lord had dispossessed before the Israelites. So here's Hezekiah, not a perfect man, but a man that does so many incredible things for God. Yet, he fails to raise an heir who will continue a spiritual legacy. He fails to produce out of his own household somebody who's ready to take the mantle and lead the people of God in the direction of mercy and justice and righteousness. And it's not just that Hezekiah was like this rock star follower of Yahweh and Manasseh was just kind of, lukewarm average. There were some real challenges in one generation. Go into 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 3 of Manasseh. It says, he rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had destroyed. So much of what Hezekiah had been working to accomplish, Manasseh undoes. He reestablishes the altars of Baal. That's how we say it in English. It's Baal in Hebrew. Baal is one of the Canaanite gods, and he's like, no, let's not go with Yahweh right now. Let's go with Baal, one of these Canaanite gods. He also made an Ashrath. Now, Ashrath is another Canaanite god, but what was really remarkable about Ashrath is that god was always worshipped by creating like a tower, like a pole. So you would see these Ashrath poles all over ancient Israel. So he's like, hey, let's see what Baal offers me. And you know what? Just hedge my bets. Let's build one of these Ashraths. We'll worship Ashrath as well. So he's got kind of two different Canaanite gods going on. He also bows in worship to all the stars in the sky and serves them. He built altars in the Lord's temple. So the place that had been devoted to the worship of Yahweh, that had been devoted to the sacrificial worship of Yahweh, he's like, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. But man, this place is awesome. Like, I don't want to let a good temple go to waste. So he goes and builds an altar to all the stars in the sky in both courtyards of the Lord's temple. Right? In case you're like, oh, he's just on like a spiritual journey. He's just like seeing what else is out there. That spiritual journey did not produce really good fruit. He sacrificed his son in the fire. So we're talking about an unthinkable level of moral evil. Right? That was also probably a nod to the god Molech, just to see if we could appease him. He also practices witchcraft, divination. He consults mediums and spiritists. And then maybe one of the more significant understatements in the book of Kings, he did a huge amount of evil in the Lord's sight, angering him. Right? Manasseh has some real challenges. And I think if we're paying attention, we all feel a sense of just how vulnerable this thing we call the church is in terms of raising up a subsequent generation who is going to bear fruit for God in our world, right? Many of you have heard of the Barna Research Group. They're just sort of like the definitive place you go to get stats on the condition and the health of the local church and the Christian movement in general. And in their most recent findings, which just came out a few months ago, Barna discovered that 80% of Christian parents are concerned about their children's spiritual development. In fact, the more spiritually mature parents are, the more concerned they are. So there's almost an element of like, hey, if you're not concerned, we're concerned about you. 76% of Christian parents are concerned about whether their children will stay true to their spiritual faith. And this is not just a bunch of helicopter parents freaking out that their kid might sprain his ankle, leave the church, and get a B every once in a while. There's ample reason to suggest that this concern is rooted in reality. A 2019 survey before the pandemic created so much havoc showed that 64% of young adults with a Christian background dropped out of church during their 20s, even though many do ultimately come back. It's usually a road back through marriage, and we have kids, and we want to kind of try to re-engage. And some of you, that's what brought you back, and that's great. You're welcome here. That's fine. But it is a pretty shocking thing to think that 64% of young adults with a Christian background drop out of their church during their 20s. And whenever you hear things like that, you're like, oh, but we'll be the exception. But isn't that a little arrogant to be like, oh, but at Restoration City, we're doing it right? Of course. It means that there's a decent chance that 64% of the kids that are back there right now in RCC Kids will walk away from their faith in their 20s. And that obviously breaks the heart of parents. But that should break all of our hearts. That should cause all of us to ask some significant questions, and it should cause all of us, whether we have children or not, to feel invested in what the team at RCC Kids is doing on behalf of the next generation right now. They're not just about free babysitting and goldfish crackers and have a juice box and let mommy and daddy go enjoy church without having to put an iPad in your face. They're back there contending for the faith of the next generation, and we all have a lot riding on what they're doing. Now, if you've been around here for a while, you might have a sense that there are more kids back in RCC Kids than there used to be, and that's absolutely true. Over the course of the summer, from May through August, we had just around 20 kids a week back there. But if you were to look at the last 3 weeks, that number with the start of the school year has jumped from 20-ish to about 30-ish. And those 30 kids are in 2 different classrooms right now. So I asked Susan Thompson, incredible leader, member of our staff team, who is now leading the charge in RCC Kids. I said, Susan, 30 kids, 2 classrooms, it's got to be a little rough. And she's like, yeah, not ideal. I said, well, hey, I want you to put together, I need an estimate of what would it take for us to open a 3rd classroom. And Susan didn't send an estimate, she sent a spreadsheet, right? Which I am learning late in life. Spreadsheets are like this love language I never knew I had. I hate creating them, but I love getting them. They give me a confidence that somebody knows what's going on. And she said, okay, here's all of the different numbers that you need to know. You need to know that there are already 17 people who are serving regularly in RCC Kids, different frequencies, but 17 people, they're serving, they're contending for the faith of the next generation. And if you're one of those 17 people, thank you so much for what you are already doing. And Susan said, okay, so let's just assume that you don't say anything in the sermon that makes one of them quit. I was like, all right, I would like to think that's a safe assumption. No promises, but yes, I like the faith. God is with us and he wants to bear fruit. So yes, nobody's going to quit. And she said, all right, well, given that assumption, if everybody serving in kids serves once a month, we need 11 more volunteers to open a 3rd classroom. And I was like, all right, that's not like impossible, that's not like, Elijah calling down fire from heaven. I think we can do that. But I was like, man, that was a little bit bigger than I thought you were going to say. That was a bigger number. And she's like, well, John, hence the spreadsheet. The key thing is really how often people are willing to serve in kids. And she said, guess what? Just so you know, if everybody serving in kids, existing volunteers plus new volunteers, serves every 3 weeks, so instead of serving 1 out of every 4, serve 1 every 3, I would only need 4 more volunteers to open a 3rd classroom. I was like, ooh, well, that sounds good, right? And some of us are like, well, there you go, problem solved. We need 4 people to raise their hand. We need everybody else who's already back there to just step it up a little bit, 1 out of every 3 weeks, not that big a deal. Problem solved, 3rd classroom, and we can all just move on. But listen to me. This is a really important point, not just about kids. This is a really important point about how we think about giving as a church. This is a really important point about how we think about everything as a church. To habitually ask more from those who are already sacrificing is kind of like cruel and unusual pastoring, right? You can't be like, oh, we need more money. I know, let's go hit up the families that are already giving and ask them to see if they can give even more. No, we don't want to be that kind of church. Right? We don't want to just say, oh yeah, those who are already serving, let's just ask more of them. Right? We want to get new people connected to this kids team. But at the same time, you're like, okay, I get it. And we definitely don't want to continually ask more of those who are already serving. But once out of every 3 weeks, that does seem manageable. What if we put that back into the conversation? And here's the thing that I wanted to put up on the screen and just lay in front of us as a church. If everyone serving in kids, both current and new volunteers, would serve 1 out of every 3 weeks, we would need 10 new volunteers to open not 3, but 4 classrooms. I kind of feel like I'm doing an infomercial where I'm like, but wait, there's more. But you see where I'm going with this. We could go with 10 new volunteers to not having 3 but 4 classrooms. Just to put it up on the screen, that would allow us for the first time since COVID to reopen our nursery so we could serve children under the age of 1, which, by the way, I also think would free up some other parents who are currently running their own private nursery to start serving in RCC kids. Right, we'd offer a preschool classroom for the 1s and 2s, and a second preschool classroom through the 3 through 5s, and then an elementary room for everybody who's in kindergarten through 5th grade. Right, we have the ability to do this, and I think we owe it to our kids to do it. Susan Thompson's going to come up at the end of the gathering. She'll give you some more information, but she will also be at the Connect table after our gathering this morning, and you can go sign up. If you're willing to be a part of this, we're going to ask you to do a background check. We're going to train you, and we would love to get you on the calendar. If you want some time to think about it, pray about it, you're listening at home, but you're willing to come and help us be a part of that, just go to rcc.church/serve and sign up for our kids' ministry, and I promise you, Susan will get in touch with you this week. All right, Laura and I are in. Laura's already serving every 3 weeks back there. I'm obviously a little busy on a Sunday morning, but on Sundays where I'm not preaching, you know where you can find me. I'll be back there in one of those classrooms, right? Because we believe in this. And I'm praying that 10 of you will decide to get involved and say, man, I could do this once every 3 weeks. Because I think there's an opportunity for us to work together to create a church where families seek out Restoration City because of the way we're serving their kids. Where people come here because of our kids' ministry, where people come here because they want to be a part of turning this tide and not seeing 64% of kids walk away from the church, right? So I would love to work with you on that. At the same time, I need to be really, really clear that this doesn't mean we're becoming Family Church USA, where we're like, great, our vision in life is to become the ideal church if you're married and have 2 kids, because I know there's a lot of us in the room that are not married and don't have 2 kids, which is why I want to remind us that we use the phrase next generation intentionally, right? Next generation is not just a euphemism for people 5th grade and under. It's also meant to encompass college students. It's meant to encompass 20-somethings. It's meant to encompass those who are trying to follow Jesus well on their university campuses and those who haven't walked away from their church in their 20s. Right? If we had more time, I would try to walk you through more of my background, but here's the short version. I came to faith in Jesus as a second semester junior at a college here in the D.C. area. After graduation, kind of traveled for a little bit, but ultimately settled down, took a job here in D.C., got connected with a local church, started serving in the college ministry, and I will just tell you, I had the time of my life. That's where I met some of my closest friends. It's ultimately where I met Laura. She was another volunteer, not a student, just for the record. And clarification, right? Met my wife, met friends. I loved every minute of doing it, right? I got to use my 20s to serve college students. And the reason I got to do that, by the way, is because I had leaders that I was serving under who were willing to empower me, who were willing to make resources available, who were willing to invest in me, who were willing to give me the freedom to make mistakes, who were willing to let me do things like rent 50-foot rock walls and put them on college campuses, and then they would lovingly bring me into the office afterwards and be like, hi, so there is this thing called liability insurance. And I'm like, oh, yeah, never heard of it. And they're like, yeah, we've noticed. Going forward, we need to acquaint ourselves with such things before we put, giant hazards on college campuses. Like, I had people that were willing to stand behind me and let me take risks for the sake of reaching my peers. And now I'm 44 and I'm married and I've got 3 kids and my life looks a little different. And what it means is it's now my job to do that for you. It's my job to lead our elders in doing that for you if you're in college, if you're in your 20s. If you're in your 30s and you want to go and be a part of reaching that next generation, we want to come alongside of you as a church. But you guys are going to have to lead the way. Because the last thing we need is some middle-aged white guy telling you what to go do to reach university students, right? Like, I still watch Castaway, for crying out loud. We need you to step up with the vision. We need you to step up with the ideas. We need you to step up with the risks so that we can come alongside you and say, yes, go for it. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We're going to help you with this. We're going to pour into you. We're going to care for your souls. We're going to do all of this. So please do not take this next generation thing to mean that there isn't a place for you here if you don't yet have kids. Nothing could be further from the truth. Right? Where the church takes on power is when we have young families and college students and singles coming together and working to reach a city to truly be a multi-generational church. And let me just really quickly say something to those of us who might consider ourselves older singles or empty nesters. We do have a couple of empty nesters in our church. And one of the things I hope I never do again is have anybody come up to me in the lobby and say, hey, I know I'm too old for this church. I'm like, no, you're not. We desperately need you. Because if we succeed in this and we're contending for the faith of kids and we become a place where there's college students running all over the place, there's 20-somethings all over the place, we are going to need a whole generation of spiritual mothers and fathers who can lean into Psalm 145, verse 4. One generation will declare your works to the next and will proclaim your mighty deeds. There's a role for all of us here. The vision that we're going after, this vision of contending for the next generation, there's room for every single one of us here. Some of us are going to do it in kids. Some of us are going to do it on college campuses. Some of us are going to do it with 20-somethings. Some of us are going to do it by being premarital mentors and coaches and community leaders and wise shepherds who are able to point the way. And here's why this matters. It matters because of the next generation, but it also matters because a church that is willing to sacrifice for the next generation will also be willing to sacrifice for those in our city who don't know Jesus. The two go hand in hand. If we're willing to sacrifice our ease and our comfort to reach kids, we will also be willing to sacrifice our ease and our comfort for the sake of those who don't know Jesus. One of my favorite quotes about the church comes from a 20th century Anglican priest named William Temple. He said this, he said, the church is the only society on earth that exists for the benefit of non-members. Right, our vision is not to create a place that is just spiritually comfortable for those of us who are already following Jesus. Our vision is to ask, what sacrifices can we make on behalf of those who are not yet already following Jesus? That we would be a church that exists for the good of our city, that we would be a church that does what we can do for the good of our world. Right? And sometimes that means going overseas. I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that in 2023, we're going to offer at least 2 different international mission trips through our partners at Three Roots International. We've journeyed with them for a couple of years. Many of you have given to support different causes with Three Roots and the work that they do in Ethiopia. They were the group that we partnered with in the pandemic to purchase radios, because when Ethiopia started doing distance learning, they didn't do it on an internet-based system. They just started broadcasting classes over the radio, and many of the villages that Three Roots was serving didn't have radios, so we bought a bunch of radios so that kids could go to school. This is an organization we know. It's an organization we trust. We love their leaders. So in April of 2023, we're going to send a team with Three Roots that's going to focus on women in the communities in Ethiopia. They're going to be doing all kinds of different training and different things to teach everything from health, hygiene, to microfinance, to women. And I believe that some of you, God is calling you in late April to go to Ethiopia. I believe that some of us are going to go to Ethiopia in late June of 2023, right? The idea of that trip is that they will be offering a summer camp for the kids that go to the school that Three Roots runs in Ethiopia, about 300-400 kids that will come to that summer camp. Tremendous evangelistic opportunity. So you want to play soccer, you want to run a summer camp for kids, you should go and be a part of that. But while that summer camp is going on, there's also going to be a teacher training happening for the entire staff at the school that they run in Ethiopia. So I'm putting it up here today because I want you to be thinking about this. If you are a teacher, you're an educator, you're a teacher trainer, this is what you do, and I know there's a number of you here. Maybe one of the things that God is going to ask you to do is to go to Ethiopia in the summer of 2023 to pour into the staff of a school that serves some enormously poor communities outside of Addis Ababa, right? I'm thrilled for us to be the kind of church that's willing to do that, to use vacation time, right? To use additional resources to go and be a part of that. But we also don't want to reduce this idea of loving and serving others to like, oh yeah, that's the kind of thing you need an airplane ticket for. No, it's not. We live in one of the most strategic corners of one of the most significant cities on earth. What would it look like if we took the same intentionality towards reaching Arlington and Alexandria, D.C., towards reaching Chiricahua, Crystal City, Pentagon City, Delray? Right? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his letters from and papers from prison, said the church is only the church when it exists for others. When we're thinking about the people that work and learn in this school every single day. When we're thinking about the young adults who live in Crystal City and Pentagon City. When we're thinking about the young families in Delray. When we're thinking about the people on Capitol Hill. When we're thinking about our neighbors and we're dreaming together of what we can do to serve and what we can do to invite people in. Right? That's the kind of fruit that we want to bear. Not just building a comfortable little church for us, but by being a part of what God wants to do in this city for his glory. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 31, as we wrap it up, says this. It says, "For a remnant will go out from Jerusalem." That remnant will go to Ethiopia. That remnant will go to Arlington and Alexandria and the District of Columbia. These survivors, this remnant of faith that will ultimately grow and blossom at Pentecost into the church. This remnant's going to go out from Mount Zion, but notice how it's all going to happen. The zeal of the Lord of armies will accomplish this. So I just wonder, what would we do this year if we really believed that the God of angel armies was on our side? If we really believed that God wanted to show himself strong, if we really believed that God wanted to glorify himself through this church, what risks would we take together? What new initiatives would we pursue? What things would we try? What would we be willing to do so that we could baptize people who have come to faith in Jesus? What are we willing to sacrifice to see marriages restored? To see people who wonder if anybody knows that they exist, welcomed into community. To see people grow into the image and the likeness of Jesus. And we know for sure that God is with us. Not just because I grabbed a verse out of 2 Chronicles or grabbed one out of John 15, but we know God is with us because Jesus went to the wood of a cross on our behalf to offer his life to do for us what we could never do on our own. To redeem, to reconcile, to restore, to make a way for us to come into relationship with God. To know that he doesn't hold our sin against us, that all of our sin, past, present, and future, has been washed clean, that in the eyes of God, if you're sitting here as a follower of Jesus, you are holy, you are beloved, and you are beyond reproach. And God wants to bear fruit through you. Sign up for kids, dream about college students, get ready for Ethiopia, invest in your community group. There's going to be more opportunities coming your way over the course of the fall as we talk about some of our other local partners here in the area. But for today, would you just believe with me that God has fruit that he wants to bear? And would you with me say, hey, Lord, wherever you're leading, I'm in. Father, that's our prayer. That's our desire. You do say in Romans 12 that we are to offer ourselves to you as a living sacrifice. And God, that's our intention here in this moment. That we would, with all of our fears, all of our doubts, all of our reservations, all of the complexities of our schedules, that we would offer ourselves to you. And we would ask you to bear fruit through us for the glory of your name.